Welcome everybody to the Creative Business Design Lab. I am Jessica Abel and I am the head of Autonomous Creative, and I'm here with my guest, Eleanor Chaney, who is an artist and creativity coach with 15 years experience sharing the creative process with thousands of people through many, many different modalities. And Ellie started out in 2009 as a self-employed artist coming out of art school, and has worked as a full-time artist in exhibitions, residencies, funded projects, etc. And also has then moved into an educational field for a while, got qualifications in teaching up to the master's level, counseling skills, all this other stuff, and has also worked a lot in education and adult education, museums, galleries, arts organizations, and so on. And Ellie has also been part of the Creative Focus community, the Autonomous Creative community, for quite a while now, working with me in Creative Focus Workshop, Autonomous Creative, and in the Incubator. Ellie, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited. I've been interviewing myself whilst washing up for about a week, so can't wait.
All the sensitive creatives in the room will recognize this tendency to prepare a lot for things that are coming up. And Ellie wrote me last week saying, what do I need to do? And what do I need to bring? And I just said, bring your wonderful self, because you're full of all the ideas that we need for the people who are coming today. We've had some really awesome questions coming in, and so we're definitely going to focus on answering questions today. If you have new questions, please, let's see, let me very quickly put the link for the Q&A form in the chat if you have questions as they come up. Now, I can try to catch them in the chat, but they could fly by. So if you use this Q&A form, it'll be easier for us to find stuff as we go along. All right, so let's just get started and get to know Ellie a little bit. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey between, getting started as an art school student, going through being a showing professional artist, education, and then moving into coaching?
Yes, so I think that actually thinking back to art school, there were always signs that I maybe wasn't quite the right person for the contemporary art world. Pretty much struggled from day one at art school to find my feet. I felt very intimidated and overwhelmed. But what I did discover is I loved sharing creativity with other people. It brought me a lot of joy to kind of work with people and help them build confidence, to work with children, and so imaginative and fun, which is kind of where a lot of my creativity had come from in childhood, escaping into worlds and disappearing into my imagination. And so that led me to working in community arts. I worked in residencies in schools, community education, talked about museum education, also celebratory arts, and I worked for puppet theatres for a bit, which was very exciting to me, being around these multi-passionate, amazing creative people who made up stories. And but what was happening was every time I got somewhere with something that I was working on, I was beginning to get offered jobs more easily. I was beginning to get build a network. I would feel really burnt out and overwhelmed, and often that would lead to me looking at how I could change direction and find something that suited me better. And so when I became a parent, for example, there was no way I could also go into schools all day, and I couldn't work with 3-year-olds all day and then watch Peppa Pig. The people who can are amazing. And so I was well, maybe I should train as a teacher. So I did that and I really loved it. But I knew within a few months of teaching that it wasn't the right thing for me to be in that formal education environment. And so I knew that I was getting places, I was getting more opportunities, I was getting kind of these dream jobs. I was getting commissioned as an illustrator for education and wildlife charities, which is something I'd always wanted. But I just wasn't enjoying it enough. It always felt like I was in this battle against myself, and anytime there was any external pressure around deadlines or expectation, I would hugely over deliver, not look after myself adequately. And so when I came to you, I think I had just reached this point where I was this has got to change, and I've got to find ways of doing this that aren't burning me out And also like impacting the people I love, because they have to see me going through this cycle every time of like excitement and throwing myself into it and then getting overstimulated and overwhelmed and then being exhausted and like half myself for a few weeks while I try and recover. And when we work together, you kind of helped me to see that coaching was a way that I could use like my passion for creativity and all of my experience, but I could also, and connect with people. Connection has always been really important to me. But even though I'm an extrovert, I get overwhelmed and I get worn out. So it was a way that I could build something from my own needs, and I could like put those boundaries in place, and I could think about what my ideal conditions were at the beginning, could support other people going through challenges like I'd already experienced, which really validates you when you've had a tough time. And like obviously the art world is not a place that works for far too many people, and there are so many things that need to change about it, and facilitating highly sensitive people or neurodivergent people is just one of those things. But for me it was like, oh, this is where this experience can become useful rather than a story of me struggling. And it makes space for my own art. That's kind of always been the dream for me, is not having to produce for other people, but produce for the joy of it and share because I love it. So I hope that answers the question.
Absolutely. Yeah. But I think that it does raise this thing of like, you were struggling for a really long time to bring in enough income with your creative work to just pay your most basic expenses. And so you got into like a cycle, basically. You got into sort of a negative cycle where I remember when we first met, or close to when we first met, you were trying to figure out how to start a YouTube channel. You were
Yes.
like, how do I start a YouTube channel so that I can build this giant audience so that I can sell whatever, 25-pound patterns for something, right? And
Yeah.
the sense of like you had to continue serving people at this very sort of like vast entry level way. They're like, that's what you sort of felt like you needed to do.
I think I was confused as well. So I
Mhm.
think I was trying to do all the things all the time that I thought I was supposed to do, but I wasn't doing any of them adequately enough because they would stress me out or I couldn't keep on top of things. I'm a great starter of things as well, but I struggle to sustain them because the energy is just unsustainable. And so like, for example, with YouTube, there's still this part of me that loves the idea of using a platform like that to connect with people and share creative process. Like I love sharing creative process. It's just now, if I were to do more YouTube videos, I'm not depending on that as a way of building a massive funnel and then selling low cost products to huge numbers of people. I mean, like even delivering that level of product was never going to work for me. Like I hate packaging orders. It makes me so anxious from start to finish. Like, is it nice enough? Have I accidentally dropped a personal note in there? Like, and do I have the right stickers and all of this stuff? Will they like it? All of these things would come up and I would go through that process every time. And so the idea of like that sustaining my lifestyle, and for a long time I was a single parent as well, it was just never going to work. And so I think you helped me to see, to like separate, and that's what I've kind of, the work that I've done really is like, what is the intention around this? How does this work with what I actually know about who I am? And what are the long-term consequences of following this idea? Because sometimes things seem like such a great idea, but I think we can like temporarily suspend experiences and things that we know about ourselves, which is not to say we can't go out of our comfort zone, but something like posting daily on social media was never going to be the solution for me. And having a huge audience sounds really intimidating and difficult to manage. So
yeah, exactly. And so you would end up, because you would hear about something or be taught something or learn something that was like this sounds like a really great idea, because like with YouTube, I can teach these techniques to vast numbers of people. That's awesome. I want people to have this because I love it and I want them to have it. And that motivation is so pure and it's so real for so many of us, but then not really sort of imagining yourself through the entire cycle of like, well, what does that mean in terms of how does this pay for my life, or how do I pay for the time to do this thing? And so you're doing that, but then you're like, okay, well, that's not quite working. So now I need another thing, and now I need another thing. And pretty soon, boom, you've got like 18 things going on, and you think that you need to be maintaining all of these things at the same time. So I think your point about, so that's where burnout comes from, right? But your point about how you figured out with yourself and with your clients to start from, what is the intention of this? Like, what am I trying to achieve with this thing? And then working backwards and figuring out what's going to work for you. I think that's a really great thing.
And also like imagining, what does that look like day to day?
Mm-hmm.
So what does that look like in 6 months when you've begun to get some traction? And I think this is really important, right? Because I don't want to demoralize people. Highly sensitive people are capable of incredible things. I feel like I should just quickly say as well, so when I say highly sensitive person, I'm talking about highly sensitive person theory, which was developed by psychologist Eleanor Chaney. She published a book in 1996 called The Highly Sensitive Person. Basically, at the most minimal level that I can explain, she, through her research, discovered that 15 to 20% of the population, she thought, had this more sensitive, more reactive brain and nervous system. And now it's thought to be maybe even 30%. And it kind of means that you are more stimulated by emotions, by physical things, environmental things, and that you have kind of the ability to become, or you become overstimulated, perhaps at an earlier point than someone who's not highly sensitive might get overstimulated. Because we all get overstimulated, and we all know what it feels like to be asked to do dozens of things at once, and our executive functioning stops working because our brain's overloaded. But that just happens maybe with different circumstances or more easily for highly sensitive people. But I think, it's actually got a lot of positives as well as a trait, because it's not a mental illness or a disorder. It's considered a trait. And that means kind of awareness of beauty, sensitivity to other people's emotions. Highly sensitive people are often very empathetic and compassionate, a love of kind of nature and animals and creativity, which is why so many highly sensitive people tend to become creatives.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's just that I was behaving as though I was not a very sensitive person. And I was always internalizing any struggles that I had around my sensitivity as me being weak or me not being tough enough. And particularly my art school education had been break you down to build you back up, teach you to look at yourself objectively. Sensitive people do not thrive in highly critical environments. They don't thrive when they feel constantly watched, and they don't tend to develop resilience by being bullied or kind of challenged. They build resilience by being supported and then feeling that they can expand their comfort zone and they can develop kind of capacity for things that felt challenging. And when I began to see it through that lens, it was oh, I've been spending 10 years acting as though I'm someone else. And no wonder this isn't really working very well.
Yeah, I think this is culturally, there's a culturally dominant thread of this, toughen up, pull up your boots, just get it done. And what's wrong with you? And especially, I mean, you're British, and I think British culture is even more along these lines of just, suck it up, get it done, whatever. Right. And certainly American is as well. I think that there are large waves of cultural change around the world at this point, around, recognizing different ways people work, and, that bullying doesn't work for anybody. It doesn't matter how sensitive you are. Bullying is not a great way to get people to meet challenges and build resilience. It just builds protective shells, right? But so anyway, that I think is not surprising to me that you would have that experience, that you would suddenly realize oh, this is not working for me, now something else. But I love that you're pointing out the strengths of sensitivity. I see that so much in the people that I work with inside the autonomous creative, people who are just highly sensitive, highly, emotional and attuned. I feel like there's maybe, and you know much more about this than I do, but I feel like within that range of people who are highly sensitive, there are people who are very sensitive to social cues and people who are very sensitive to other things, that there's different ways that people's sensitivity manifests. And that sensitivity to social cues can, when people feel that, can be very inhibiting in terms of being, an artist or creator of any kind in public. But there's a lot of disregard of like, what would that feel like and how to navigate that sort of in the zeitgeist of how we teach people to be artists.
Definitely. I mean, I think that I came into this community because I did authentic visibility, because if we're being told one thing all day on the internet, it's like, if you want to be successful as a creative, you have to be really visible and you have to be seen and people have to be able to connect with you. And like, of course, that's true. That's how you build relationships. That's how people invest in the work that you do. But the advice that I was encountering, it had a similar vibe to sort of that art school idea of like, just get on and do it. Like, and we all find it hard, but it doesn't matter, just keep showing up. And it obviously, these things do get easier with practice and they do become more comfortable. But I think it's important to point out as well, like that, so within the highly sensitive person kind of concept, actually 70% of highly sensitive people are thought to be introverts, but 30% are thought to be extroverts. And I'm an extrovert, and then would think there are challenges with being an introvert, of course, and that makes visibility very difficult. And then I realized that for me, there was this challenge with like being extroverted and wanting to be seen, but really suffering every time I was seen. The vulnerability of it would be really, really painful. And so I think when we kind of look at that, it's not, oh, well, I struggle with visibility, therefore I am doomed as a creative, which is sometimes what I would feel. But it's more like, how can I support myself before, during, and after this process? Because there are ways to do these things that aren't like, just show up on a live and wing it and it will be fine. Like for me, it was never fine. At the beginning, it was always like, well, I'm never doing that again. That was a disaster. And now I'm going to spend the rest of the day feeling shaky and anxious, and I can't afford to lose all that energy all the time. So with my clients, we sort of talk about, I think we approach it from a kind of a strength-based perspective, firstly. So it's like, how do you enjoy communicating with people? What do you feel will enable you to be yourself? If you enjoy writing, then let's explore email marketing instead, if that's a space that you feel you can be seen. Or if you do want to talk and you do enjoy video, then we can open up like, where's the fear coming up? Or what do you want support around, which will enable you to do that? Or how can you create a self-care kind of plan afterwards? So when you're in this early stage of doing something that's out of your comfort zone, you're not suffering to the extent that it's depleting you, because that's not beneficial and that's not going to encourage creativity or, longevity of any strategies. So yeah, lots of different approaches, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I think, we both know, everybody agrees, like you do have to be visible in some way if you want to have your work be seen, because that's the only way to have something be seen, is to be visible. But what does that mean? What does it mean in practice? What does it mean in terms of how exactly you're going to go about doing this? And I think that's can be very individual and very, like, the dominating story we hear is that being visible means having massive audiences, particularly on social media, showing up constantly, showing up on video, being on all the platforms. And it's a model that doesn't actually correspond to what's necessary for most people, whether they want to have their work seen or not.
Yeah, maybe what they're craving. Like if you want local exhibitions, is social media really going to find you those things? Or is actually building a relationship with your local network going to be more effective? Or if you're wanting to work, I don't know, with galleries, like we've talked about a lot, then 100,000 Instagram followers isn't the magic key to that. It might open up opportunities. I think, it's
But
for
is
me,
it
what's
worth it? I mean, there's other ways, right? Like there are other
yeah.
ways to open those opportunities that are a lot less work and a lot less painful than
And
trying to
also,
build an audience of 100,000.
like, I think a lot of people who are very sensitive, and I should just say, sensitivity can make it difficult for creatives who are ADHDers as well, for example, who are hypersensitive. So it's not just like one description that fits all people. I think we're all kind of learning to understand like this language and how our brains work and what those experiences are like in the real world. But for a lot of people, being visible does not feel safe. And there are like real world examples of why society needs to change around that too. And so when you're just dismissed as like, oh, you're self-sabotaging or you're just getting in your own way, it doesn't help you make progress, and it just carries on this story that you're failing, and that's not helpful to anybody. And I think kind of realizing how many of my clients and myself have become like the carriers of all these critical voices who basically tell them that they are the root cause of their own lack of success is so harmful. And really, when you give people support and you give them the space to work out what their needs are, what they actually care about and enjoy, and what makes them excited, I think there's a common misconception that sensitive people are like a bit dull, or that there's something boring because of people who are gentle or mild-mannered. But actually, like, anyone I've spoken to is just this incredible, amazing creative person with like worlds of creativity inside them and so much to say. It's just they haven't been given the resources and support they need to say it in a way that makes them feel like more secure, or that they're seen in a way that they can navigate and manage, as opposed to a way that makes them feel judged or overwhelmed.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. Growing from that, the authentic visibility thing, like the seed of who are you really, and how do you want to show up in the world? What's important to you? What are the goals you're actually going for? Because if you don't clarify those things, it can just be incredibly frustrating, because you're taking actions of various kinds that lead to something or other, but does it have any relation to what you actually want? And so then, as you say, like, people have these incredible ideas, worlds of creativity inside them, but are frustrated in not being able to express those things to other people because they're too busy trying to fulfill expectations here, there, and everywhere, and getting depleted by all of that,
Well, and just to add, like, I mean, people can find it if they're in the community, if they join AB, I'm sure. But when I went through that activity a few years ago, in the weird color activity, it was like I mean, I've always been really passionate about like emotional intelligence and learning about myself and understanding myself and going to therapy and all of these things. But just to think, like, who am I? Like, what is this what are these things that come together that make me me? It was like an unmasking kind of process, I think, because a lot of sensitive people have been told in various different ways their whole life that they're flawed and they need to fix themselves, and you end up kind of people pleasing and over delivering because you're always trying to make up for what you perceive as your inadequacies. And for me, it was like it made some space to just be my weird self a bit more, and like find other people who I actually connected with. And that was just a really beautiful thing for me. So thank you, Jessica.
Oh, you're welcome. I love
Just
that activity.
punched my chair.
This is something that was inspired by a talk that I saw by Wendy McNaughton, the cartoonist and visual journalist. And she was talking about her own career and how odd she has this niche in visual narrative that is very unique and interesting. And she was talking about how the different parts of her background fed into that. And she'd gone to art school like you did, Ellie, very contemporary art school, got a master's, I believe. And then she worked in an advertising agency. And then she did some social justice work in Africa and was doing graphic design stuff for voting campaigns in Rwanda. And then she became a social worker. So it's this very odd, like different things. And she did her class. She's one of the people who kind of relaunched the Venn diagram as a meme, essentially. And so she created a Venn diagram of her background, and the middle color, she called it her weird color, like that is her. And so I translate that into an activity for authentic visibility, where I ask you, and this is something I would say anybody who's listening to this might want to try, is like, look at what are the things that go into who you are as a creative, and try to see how those things overlap and create, influence who you are today. And then embrace that, rather than going like, that is terrible, let me hide those things. Like, those are the things that actually are going to attract the right people to you. That background is going to be very helpful, I think, to center you. And this actually, there's a question that came in that I think we can jump into questions at this point, because there's a related question that I think we can answer with this. See if I can find it. There are a lot of questions. Okay.
I like questions.
Yeah. So Jason asked this question, which is very related. I don't know if Jason is here today, but he submitted it early. If one tends to merge empathically with others around them, how are they to discover their authentic selves, desires, and dreams? What's your thought about that, Ellie?
I have to focus my thoughts so I don't go on for too long. I think that when you're an empathetic person, you have a desire to please others or connect with others. And actually, it's kind of been shown when we talk about authenticity, like being able to adapt when you're around people and pick up on what they're interested in or they're enjoying, or what kind of person they are, and connect with them by putting forward the parts of yourself that they will relate to. Like, I don't think that's inauthentic. I think that's good people skills, because there are times when I want to be serious and there are times when I want to be silly, and being able to identify where someone else is at is really important. And coaching is such a beautiful example of that as well, like kind of reflecting your client's state that day so that they're able to be themselves. But we all long to be like our authentic true self. I do very, very much. And I think opening up questions about who do I think I have to be liked or accepted in this community was really important for me. So I decided, just an example of my own story, somewhere along the line, I decided quite early on that because I was very sensitive, maybe like people don't take me as seriously because of my voice and like the way that I present myself, gesticulatory, is that a word? That I had to be kind of, I had to over deliver as much as possible to sort of justify my presence in that space, particularly when I was in meetings where I was like, felt that I wasn't worthy of being in that space. I think really it comes down to spending time respecting and appreciating who you are when other people aren't there. Who do you know yourself to be? Like, and we all know you can do that through journaling, or who do we become when we're the people that we feel know us best and we can relax around, and then kind of carrying that into community art spaces. I still have this tendency, for example, to go into massive people pleasing mode and be pleading, Freudian slip, and like kind of want to, disarm any people that seem a little bit less welcoming, but with my lovely kindness, like go into this act of like, how can I be whatever you need me to be? But actually, it's very stressful to try and maintain that. And then you have to transition into having a real relationship. So I think that's been useful. Also, in terms of boundaries, I think there are some really simple activities that have changed my life. So one is like a non-negotiable list. So if people often ask me to do things, and that's lovely. I want to help and I want to be a part of my community and like the wider arts community. I now have a list of like, well, actually, I don't want to do these things anymore. I don't want to write any more risk assessments. Like, that's not fulfilling or fun or exciting for me. It's just something I did because I thought I could be useful, and that made me feel more worthy in the moment. Another thing that I do is I have more clearly identified what my own needs are. And I do this with clients. So like, how much time do you actually have to dedicate to other people's needs, or especially like in a work environment? We talked about this in the arts. There's an expectation and education that you'll constantly over deliver, that you will put the rest of your life on hold. I didn't sit down for years and think, how much time do I actually have for other people? Like, how much energy do I have, and what do I need in a day to feel well and to not tip into this place of kind of coping or surviving? And that enables boundaries to be formed quite early on. And because those things don't come naturally to me and a lot of my clients, we do things like have a list of phrases on your phone or your computer, which are polite ways of saying no, or have what's another one that we use? Don't agree to things on the phone or in person if you're likely to say yes to things that you don't really want to do. Like, just practicing that statement, like, that sounds great, can I get back to you about it tomorrow, has been a game changer for me, because we all know what it feels like to say yes in eagerness and like want to make other people happy and walk away and just feel like I have completely ruined the next 2 weeks of my own life and I don't know how to retract this. So
Yeah.
I hope that's useful.
Super useful. All those things are super useful. And I mean, this is a thing we do like in the incubator, in our business training, we do a whole thing around guardrails, and we have that conversation all the time. And this leads into another question. It actually came up with 3 different people in different ways that I want to talk about, because what you're talking about in terms of setting up your conditions for success be ahead of time, knowing what they are in your own, taking your own time on your own or in conversation with a coach, to set up, here's what my limits are, here's what I can offer. And one of the things about setting up guardrails, effective guardrails, is that when you go into an engagement in the beginning, when you go into even a conversation at the beginning, and you're explicit about these things, you have rules around them. It's like things like using a scheduler instead of just being like, well, whenever, like I'll meet with you whenever, but you have time already set up, you offer the link. It helps both parties, it helps both you because your guardrails are being respected, and then you can function better. But then it also helps the other person because they know exactly what they can get from you and when. They know what the rules are. There's no sense of like, am I overstepping? Is there something? Because people on the other end feel these things too. Occasionally you're dealing with somebody who doesn't feel those things, and then you just have laws in place to hold them in place.
And it's hard. It's
Yeah.
really hard, and it takes practice, and you make mistakes, and there are times when you're like, I know better, and I've just done it again, and it's frustrating, but it's
and you can back out of things. You can say no later. You can say, you know what, I looked at my calendar, I can't do that. It's even harder than doing it in the first place, but you can consider and change your mind. You're allowed to do those things. I think that's really important as well. So let me look at these 3 questions together. Bob says, how do I get control of my work and set the tone for clients from a vantage point of strength rather than one of need and necessity to keep the bills paid? So, it's the question essentially about, feeling more empowered in conversations. Suzanne says, do you have any advice or strategies for getting out of my own way when it comes to submitting my work for publication? I watch former MFA classmates and friends sending things off as I sit on the sidelines, or post only on Instagram work that I could be submitting, even though I'm making work that I believe is publishable. So again, like it's about, there's a self-confidence, there's a place that you're in this, what is your relationship with the people around, in your world? And I believe there was one other one, yes, from Christine, who says, how can I avoid feeling like a nervous job applicant every time I send out a proposal to an editor or potential agent? That feeling makes these queries take much longer to write. And if you're here, by the way, and you want to join in the conversation, just raise your hand and I'm happy to unmute, happy to have you unmute and chat with us. I'd really love to hear from you. But, off the top of my head, I just want to start this off by saying pretty much what you just said about how do you figure out your parameters for safety is really important starting place. This does get back to the weird colors kind of activity where it's like, can you write a story about who you are in the world that has no relation, that it comes out of your own history and your own like positive engagement with your creativity. So that's a good place to start. Then these guardrails, like determining what do you need to feel safe? Like, what are the things that you need to feel safe? Getting back to something we were talking about earlier, where you're like looking at the outcomes you want from something. There's a lot having to do with negotiation that goes into this as well, and knowing like what a positive outcome would look like for you. Like, what's your baseline for this? Like, what's your minimum? What's your maximum? What range is that in? Do you have other thoughts about these things?
Well, I think kind of what I heard is there's two areas. Like one is like practical approaches that can help to reduce anxiety or make you feel like you're on a stronger footing as you approach these things. And the other is like, how do you deal with the emotional processes of imposter syndrome and like doubting your self-worth and all of these things. So I think the first thing I was going to say is something that's been really beneficial to my clients and me, I know we've talked about this, is I have is looking at what can you put in place before someone's even contacted you or you're even having a conversation. I am most likely to bend those boundaries and say yes to something I don't want to do, or even kind of over give and offer things nobody even wanted, but I will like literally just offer in the moment. And so using my website was a really important part of that for me, because it enabled me to really clearly communicate like what I do, the kind of work I'm looking for. Now as a freelancer, I have a form that people can fill in where I'd put this range of prices. And then when I was in incubator, you were like, get rid of the bottom price because you don't want to do that work anyway. And that was kind of a really useful for me, that I ask people questions. And I know it can feel, when you're trying to make a living in the arts, like you have no right to set any parameters or ask anything. We've almost been trained to believe that we should just be super grateful and take what we can be given. And if we cause trouble, then people are just going to find someone else who's cheaper or easier to work with. But what I noticed, I started doing audits of all the projects that I'd done and like reflecting on, was this a positive experience? And if not, where do I feel this began to go wrong? And a lot of the time it was in those very early conversations, because I just wasn't being clear about what I wanted or what I was prepared to do. And then over time, resentment would build and frustration would build. Some of my clients have been absolutely lovely, by the way. But like if it went wrong, it would often be that I could have mitigated that earlier on with more kind of clarity in the messaging about the work that I do. I have email templates now, and even saying, like, I made a rule, I worked out that, sounds very indulgent even saying it, but jobs where I was paid less than £1,000 tended to be where I lost the most time and money, because my partner once said, you do £1,000 work on a job even if you're getting paid £50. So it kind of became this danger area for me, and a lot of my clients have gone through similar things. And yes, it's really scary to say, actually, I'm not going to do that piece of work, but I would love to work with you in the future, and it sounds like a wonderful project, all of those like lovely things which are true. And it makes space for the work where you are going to be adequately paid and your boundaries are going to be more respected. And then you can do those like longer term, exciting projects that are more meaningful to you, rather than constantly just like deadline, like trying to take those little bits of money. And it's just tough, and our society isn't really built to support us adequately as creatives. But I kind of got to this point where I was like, I need to put my well-being first and trust that the work isn't all going to vanish. I kind of started thinking, if it does all vanish, then I'm like, this is not the right path for me, because I'm not doing this till I'm 65. I'm not doing all-nighters at like 37 years old, like still. So
100%. Yeah. And I think that the thing that we talked about a lot, we do about a lot in general, is that pricing is communication. Pricing is communicates something to the person you're talking to that it's nonverbal, but it's very, very important. And when you walk into a situation and your pricing is, your minimum is at their maximum, right? That's where you start, and you pitch it higher than that, and you have a little wiggle room to come down to their max, then you are going to be treated like a professional. You're going to be treated like an equal. You're going to, they're going to ask less of you when you charge more like that than if you come in like, I'll do anything, like, please just hire me. It's a really, it sets up, we're primates, it sets up a status situation that's very toxic.
It's not just that, it's that I remember talking to a client about this. It's like, we're built, or maybe it was in a group meetup thing, like every choice that we make, it builds a stepping stone for the next thing ahead of us. So for me, like where I've burnt out a few times, and it's like been awful, like physically and mentally. And I got to this stage where like the quality of work I was making, I pushed it and pushed it and pushed it because I wanted it to be as good as possible. It was utterly unsustainable, and it meant staying up all night, like not being the mom I want to be, not being the friend I want to be, all of those things. And then it was leading to other work where there was an expectation I would deliver the same quality, that I would kind of make all that extra effort. And every person you work for, especially if you're freelance, they perceive that the project you're doing for them is your most important project. And a lot of us are spinning multiple projects. And I was like constantly trying not to drop the whole thing and keep those things. And there was no end in sight. So I know we had a lot of conversations about this though at the beginning of Incubator, because volunteering for causes I care about or my community are like integral parts of my identity. And I was like, well, if I start putting all these boundaries up, Jessica, I'm going to stop being me, because one of my guardrails is to live in like an ethical way that's in alignment with my values, and no money is going to ever make up for how bad I feel if I stop doing that. And you helped me to see that, like, where there were decisions that I could make about protecting myself and my needs, and when I stopped undercharging, which I still struggle with, I'm pretty sure, like I'm charging now, but I've made significant leaps and bounds. Then I can volunteer because I have the time or the energy, or like I care about this thing, not this like race to the bottom where it's like, oh, if I have the lowest price, then I'll make the most sales or I'll get the most jobs, because I was working as much as I possibly could and I still wasn't making enough money to live like
the math just
the
didn't
kind
work.
of fairly simple life I really wanted to live. Just so I don't forget, on the emotional side of like submitting for things, that's a big one, and it's complicated, and it's very much about personal history and experiences in the world and who we are. So I can kind of think of some examples of clients and myself where over time we begin to, especially if we struggle to put ourselves out there, I think this connection can happen where our sense of self and our self-worth becomes tied to the yeses that we're getting back. That process of like, oh, actually, I know my work has value, and I know that it sounds like an Instagram meme, so I'm really sorry, everybody, but like I'm worthy, like no matter how many people are saying yes to my applications, was work that I had to do, because every time I got a no, I was crushed. And actually getting no's is part of the process. Like I once applied, I think, for like 20 things in a year, and I got like 15 no's and 3 maybes or something. Like I'd have to check. That's not a factual statistic, but it was around that. Some of them absolutely like devastate me because I'd put so much hope and work into them. But I looked at them and I began to see they were quite inconsistent, because like the people-pleasing tendency, I was like, oh, maybe I can fit myself into this. Maybe I can squeeze myself into that box. So I wasn't actually sharing work that was true to me and that was in alignment with my practice and my portfolio. I was like just kind of like trying to find a space that I thought someone would accept me, and pulling back from that and not wasting time on things that really weren't a good fit or weren't going to build a stepping stone to something I wanted was a real saver of time. But yeah, I think that when we get rejected, and like some people experience like rejection sensitivity, and that is incredibly painful. It's about support networks of people who we can talk to and feel supported and reminded that that opportunity is not who we are as a person, and that there are so many other things out there, because you can become a little bit kind of focused on, or I definitely did, nobody wants me, nobody's going to say yes, like, and I've had plenty of opportunities and plenty of privileges, but I'm still somehow not doing this right. And I need somebody to validate me, and like validating myself was like essential first step to just kind of seeing, oh, well, I got a no, but I might be one step closer to the next yes. So
Well, I mean, I
that's
think
quite generic
the
advice.
thing I would always point out is that in that year when you got 15 no's and 3 maybes, you got 2 yeses, and you got 3 maybes, which may have turned into yeses in the future. And so this is, everybody knows this already, but like, you can't get the yeses unless you're willing to have the no's happen. And that's the balance. But I think your point about having a plan around handling the rejection, so having a community of people, having like a co-working group, having other professionals that who can support you through it, having one of the best techniques we use in the Creative Focus Workshop and in the Autonomous Creative in general, in the collective, which is our membership, is co-working, where people can show up. And if you need to you need to apply to something, you need to apply to something, you need to submit something, having a co-working session where you're in a room with people and you can talk, you can say like, I'm doing this thing, I'm really nervous about it, guys, I need support. And you work, you do it, and have everybody go like, yes, hit send, you can do it, and support you through it, is a way to feel like you're not crazy, like it is hard, there is, these things, these struggles are real. Also, of course, with the support of a coach, having that sense of like, this is a process, a difficult process. We acknowledge the difficulty of it, but it's also necessary and you're ready. Because that gets back to what we're talking about with the other half of this question, which is walk in with your guardrails intact as a professional, as an equal. And a lot of that has to do with sort of that self-reflection of like, I am worthy, my work is great, I know it's great, I know it's worth people's attention. I feel good about who I am as an artist. I feel, and also I'm going to set up external protections so that I'm not caused to question those things at every possible turn, that I don't have to answer the question of like, why is your pricing this? Because the pricing just is this, that's what it is. You don't need to answer the question of like, well, can we meet at Saturday night at 7 p.m. because it's not on your calendar, and not, I won't, but I don't, work outside these hours, having different phrases you can use that can help you protect those kinds of times. So it's a balance of both things, I think. It's yes, that it acknowledging that it is really difficult, getting support around it, having a plan for the submission, having a plan for getting the responses, like what are you going to do when you get that envelope or that email, who needs to be in the room with you when you're opening that up, having those plans in place, but then at the same time, developing a more resilient kind of sense of like yourself as a professional in the world, which can even get back to stuff we were talking about earlier, where it's like, what is your goal with this? Like, why are you submitting to this thing? Is it something, and you were saying this too, when you're saying you're applying to stuff that you probably shouldn't have applied to and trying to fit yourself into their model. It's like, what is your goal with this application? Is this something that you actually want the result of? If you get this thing, are you going to be screwed, basically?
And what can you do without having to wait on all of those yeses? Like, I think that's really valuable, is like, well, I know I want to make this work, or this thing matters to me. How can I start that before I fill in all these funding applications. For me, I probably should have applied for my own arts funding about a decade before I did. And honestly, it was ridiculous. Like, I had so much experience. I'd worked with so many people on applications, and I just could not do it because I tried and I got several rejections, and then I began to think of a rejection as the beginning of a learning process, not the end of a process. So I started looking for support, and I started learning about how to write applications, and I started talking to people who had been through similar processes. And I think this is the thing, like, these things are really hard for everybody. And that's what we hear a lot. It's like everybody struggles with visibility. Everybody struggles to share their work. Everybody struggles to sell. But it's like a spectrum where there's struggling and finding it difficult and being able to kind of do it because you have to. And then there are people that I've worked with who just aren't able to do some of these things without like really quite bespoke support. And sometimes that support is paying someone else to sort of help them write up their funding application and send it in for them, because it avoids them having to deal with all of those questions around imposter syndrome and the value of their work. And it creates a slight detachment. And obviously I understand like these things are expensive, but it's for very sensitive people, hearing that it's hard for everybody, but not being able to do anything or act on it or like develop a way forward, you inevitably assume it's just you, like, and that you must be doing this because deep down you're frightened of success and therefore you need to work on your mindset. We probably all do. Like, I need to work on my mindset, but there are times where I just needed somebody to help me get over that hump so that I could stop being stuck in the mud.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think people who are really good at applying to things over and over again or sending in letters or applications, they do look at it as a living process, not here is an opportunity for somebody to judge me and knock me down forever, that like their judgment is more valid than my own, but that here is a project I may want to do or a thing, and I would really like to work with these people at that sort of more equal level. You get a rejection, you go, oh, that's interesting. It's painful, but there's information in here. Looking at different rejections in different ways, because some of them will contain actual information for you and say like, we liked this about your application, but not that, or whatever. Knowing you can reapply to almost everything, there's almost always like, you can go back to the same opportunity again with more information. Very frequently, the jury is different, or the people you're sending to you can keep going back and like getting better at something and improving on it. It does not have to be a one and done kind of, you're shut down, which is not, not to say that any of this is easy. It's not for anybody. It doesn't matter how sensitive you are. Getting a no to something you have your heart set on is very painful, period. It's a very difficult process. And one of the things I think that's most painful about applying to things is the lack of agency. That all you can do is you put your stuff into an envelope, virtual or real, you send it off and you're like, cross your fingers and hope something happens. And you have no agency over it at all, which is why I love to design projects around things that I can do, as opposed to waiting for other people to give me a stamp of approval, because you never know, right? You don't have control over that.
And we don't all have like the time or the money. And I'm very lucky I don't make giant metal sculptures, because that has all sorts of practical challenges that come with the manufacture of the work. But realizing like, if you're making things that are showing where you want to go, you're more likely to find the opportunities that are going to help you carry on with that kind of work. So like, I think for me, I would often imagine this work in my head, and it was so exciting and so wonderful. And then all I would see is like the doors that had closed when nobody would open one for me. And then when I started making things that really excited me again, which sadly was like the consequence of going to art school and becoming a professional artist, even though I hate that term, was like, I started almost having to wait for validation or permission before I was making.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when I flipped that, I was like, no, but this is when I was like 16, I would spend 3 hours a night like on my sketchbook because I loved it. Why am I not tapping into that part of me? Like the joy of and the excitement needs to result in something, because otherwise it kind of like, where's it going? So it helps me to start making things, and then people, for example, if you've got a portfolio that does show your kind of ideal dream jobs, of course, people are going to find it easier to see that work and imagine doing that kind of work with you than if you've got nothing, or you've got a bunch of jobs that you did because you just had to make that next £300. And that was like kind of taking authority, I guess, of my own practice again.
Yeah. I have a sort of thing I say all the time, which is the no cowboys rule about your portfolio, that if you don't like drawing cowboys, don't put any cowboys in your portfolio. Just don't do it. Like, no, if you love cowboys, fill your portfolio with cowboys. But if you don't like drawing cowboys and horses, do not put them in your portfolio. That will, like, if you have one cowboy in your portfolio, that is what the art director is going to see and ask you for. So again, yeah, that's about taking some control over who you are as a professional, who you are in the world. Yeah. So even if that means making spec projects, I think that's completely fine if that's what it takes. But I would want to expand this and say, like, as I've been doing interviews for the Autonomous Creative podcast, this is the most common thing I hear from people about: how did you get started? How do you become you? How do you get your awesome career? Almost to a person, that question has come back with, I just started doing stuff. I started doing this thing. And by then sharing it, not just doing it in my garage, but like doing it in a way where I could put it in front of people, that started bringing people together and creating what I have now, creating this career that I have now. And before that, I was doing things that were kind of, sort of, and now I'm doing things that I want to be doing. And it's because I just started doing the thing, just started making what I want to be making. And so that's a huge argument for not getting too strategic about all this stuff and just committing to something that you're super excited about, and then making sure that you're putting it in front of people, which brings us to one last question. We're out of time here, but I'm going to bring one question in because I think it's important and relates to a lot of other questions that we're not going to get to. Jennifer says, how do you market your work when it's something you absolutely dread? I just put so much into what I make and then often sabotage the launch by just hiding. So this is very related to what we were just talking about. And I think there are a couple of things I would say to that. That are, again, repeating kind of stuff we've said before. And one is, what are the outcomes you're looking for? Like, what do you want out of launching this thing? Like, what are the results you want? Get specific about it, because just like, I want it to be good or big or people to like it, or like, it's not going to help you make any plans if you're and it just gets overwhelming really, really quickly. So if you can boil it down to very specific things you want out of a project, and then tie those back to, okay, then I can take these actions. The actions can potentially be much smaller and much more manageable than they would have been if you're trying to just do this massive, who knows what, right? Like, whatever those things are. And then making sure that you're treating the launch of the thing as a project, like as an actual, it's not just a sort of step of a larger thing. It is a project on its own, and those would be the two big things that jump to my mind. But I definitely think this ties back to many of the topics that have come up through this hour.
Yeah, I think it's like, what do you need to tap into to make marketing less difficult and less painful? So are you a creative who's driven by play or joy or sharing your story or deeper meaning? Because, as you say a lot, like, marketing is creative energy, and it's when we're doing things which are like maybe completely uninspiring or tedious, or they're intimidating and they're giving us nothing back, they become like, how do I go forwards? But I've worked with clients, and sometimes it's like, what's the kind of way into this where you can start opening up? And what structures and support can you find where you don't have to waste your energy thinking about what should an email marketing sequence look like? No one has to invent that. There are like so many ways that we can learn that, especially within this community. So the question becomes, how do I make this email marketing welcome sequence exciting or engaging or fulfilling for me? And what do I hope that people at the other end of that will experience? But definitely a lot of us are really cunning at doing I would say 80% of the work, and then just abandoning our projects, and the 20% we're actually going to make money from them. I've done that so many times as like a multi-passionate ideas creative person, and as difficult as it was for me to see that, when I began to see that that was happening, and yes, it was fear, and yes, it was fear of judgment and all of these things, but also like it was not really knowing how to do it and not really understanding it, and so then retreating when it became overwhelming. Like it is, we all want to make our work, but we also get so much back when we let people see that work and enjoy that work too. And that can be a really beautiful thing if you believe like actually marketing isn't just about I have to put this out there because I have to do this or else I'm not a real artist. It's like I'm sharing and I'm letting people into this thing I care about, and maybe I'm inspiring them, and maybe I'm bringing something that they needed in their life, and that is
For
like
sure.
a reframe that helps me.
Yes, definitely. I had, yeah, in general, like making sure that you're not just looking at some marketing plan that you download off the internet and saying like, okay, well, I need to fulfill all of these things. I'm completely overwhelmed. I'm out. I'm not doing anything. And instead thinking like, what, again, like what's actually important to me? And are the actions I'm thinking about doing, are they connected to those results at all? And reframing the idea of marketing. So I was speaking to somebody yesterday who was explaining to me how she's not doing marketing. She's actually just sharing her work with people who really like it so that they can learn more about it and enjoy it and potentially buy her work. And I was like, sorry, but that's marketing. You can call it whatever you want, but that's that bridge building between your work and what people love is, it's, you can call it whatever word makes you comfortable, but that is the action of marketing. It's building connections between your work and what you offer and other people's perception and other people's ability to access it.
Well, very quickly, Jessica, what that made me realize is for a lot of my clients, what we've unpicked is that the fear behind marketing isn't the marketing or the being visible as much as the thought of having to sell at the end of it. And so so many sensitive people hate selling, like hate it, find it impossible to do without huge discomfort. And that's why so many of us give our work away for free or like over deliver. And I think so that's been really useful, is like going through and kind of opening up like what is selling and what would feel like ethical selling to you, what would feel like honest selling to you, what practices don't you want to engage in. All of those things are really important, because we think of selling as like the transactional bit that happens at the end that has no kind of emotional hang-ups around it, but selling is so big for so many of us. And when we market our work, we're actively saying to the world, I want to sell this, and that can bring up lots of feelings.
Tons of feelings. And I think the most important thing, and this is what I think what you're referring to, is figuring out a way to reframe selling as service, that sales can be service in the sense that your work is a service to people, getting access to your work is a service to people. And selling is part of that. Showing them how this can be a service to them is the marketing part. And it also turns into the sales part. And doing that in a way that you feel absolutely clean with, that feels absolutely aligned with who you are, is essential in terms of being able to make money with this.
And it's all a process. Like I'm definitely not there. I find selling hard, but it's also empowering. And I think all of these things are like a journey, and we can't like put ourselves under the pressure to just be fine with it immediately. Like I spent a year on incubator, and I must have like taken one step forward, two steps back so many times, as you witnessed, but it was still progress. And it still took me at the end so far from where I started. Like my whole life changed. So thank you.
You're welcome. It was my pleasure, very much so, to have you in the program. I have put into the chat eleanorchaney.com, where you can find out more about Ellie's work. I am also offering coaching services at this point. And so we have a brand new page you can check out, jessicaable.com/coaching. So if you want support around your marketing plan and getting something launched, doing applications, business building, all those kinds of things. I am very interested in talking to you about that. And Ellie, I know, would be very interested in talking to you about supporting you through the best way to shine as a sensitive creative.
Yes, and I meant to say, if people are interested in learning more about highly sensitive person, they can go to the hsperson.com website, and there's like a kind of quiz you can do and things like that. So don't want people to just take it from me. They can go on a whole journey of like learning about themselves and reading all the other great resources out there, as well
Which,
as
if you feel like
I've
you
got
need to
some on
do
my
that, you
website.
probably are a highly sensitive person. If you feel like you have to validate this by doing a lot more research.
Yeah, I mean, I did it the other day just to see if I was still a highly sensitive person before I did this, and I ticked every box, and I was like, oh, phew, okay, I can come on and like come under this title. I have a right to have an opinion about this.
Basically
So
a sign that you, like, even having those thoughts means you don't have to take the quiz. But yes, that's great. I'm really glad for you to share that resource. We'll make sure to get that into the notes when we post this on YouTube and when we get it into the Autonomous Creative Podcast down the line. Everybody here, please note on your calendar, our next Creative Business Design Lab is on June 14th, and we'll have Rowney Higson here, who's a silversmith who makes gorgeous sculptural commissions that basically can take over her entire life. So we're going to talk about how she's finding clients, balancing those really big, crazy, awesome, juicy projects with more manageable projects that can keep things flowing, and how she's leveraging a major retrospective that she's working on into support for her business building. So I'm looking forward to speaking with Rowney in a month. Hope you'll all be back. Thank you for being here live. Thank you for your questions. We didn't get to absolutely everything, but I hope we touched on subjects that were helpful to everybody here. And it was really great to have you, Ellie. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, and I hope to see everybody soon. Bye-bye.